G'day everyone, how you doing? Welcome to Lubrication Experts. Today I've got a very, very special episode, and we're going to be talking with Thom Schiff, um, formerly of Mobile, now out on his own with Schiff Asset Management. So encourage you, if you've got any questions or anything like that at the end of this, to reach out to Thom. He has a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience to be able to share with us. Prior to Mobile, he was also working in the industry, in the field as well, has a lot of, actual real world lubrication experience as well as asset management experience. So don't want to confine it just to lubricants. Obviously, that is the focus of this channel. And today what we're going to be talking about is, world-class asset management or world-class maintenance, and exactly, what does it take to become a world-leading organization when it comes to maintenance, reliability, and asset management. And probably that's how we'll kick it off, really. So just that we can all be on the same page and set a bit of a North Star. When we talk about world-class maintenance, what do you actually mean by that? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, well, first, Rick, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure, and hopefully I can help others, out there with, my experience, which means I guess I'm kind of old now, but yeah, no, really appreciate it. It is, yeah, I'm glad you said asset management and versus just maintenance management. A lot of people use the terms a bit interchangeably, but I like to think in terms of asset management as I think this is more inclusive to the success of a world-class enterprise that involves, because a lot of people think of maintenance as just the guys turning the wrench out in the field, but it does involve, if you're really going to maintain, and run your assets well, it takes maintenance, operations, engineering, procurement, the SHE department, HR, you name it, working together to make that happen. So asset management to me makes it feel it's more of the family of that impacts the actual physical assets and the people assets as well to make a world-class operation. But boy, and I'll try and keep it somewhat brief, my best. But my picture would include several aspects, and I think that it always starts with leadership. It has got to be extremely strong from top down. They got to have clarity and commitment to what the organization's goals are. What's their core values, what are their beliefs, what are their approaches to that, and have an extreme focus on customers, both internal customers and external. I think, a commitment to operational excellence is absolutely part of those core values. If you don't have that, I think someone's going to struggle. But you always have to put safety, the environment, product integrity, ethics. Those have to be first in every case before you even start. I think as you move away kind of from the overarching, goal strategy, you have to get alignment between all the functions, like we talked about, operations, engineering, maintenance, procurement, on what those goals are, and have a general interest approach to the success, and that everyone has an understanding of each other's goals, the overarching company goals, and how each group has to contribute, and what are those challenges that they all have, and to have empathy for all of them. Meaning that, a lot of times people will point fingers at different parts of an operation, but you have to have empathy to start feeling, hey, I understand the challenges you have, and work together to help each other overcome those. And there are many times where the way you operate your equipment can absolutely impact how much maintenance is going to be done, and how well you do your maintenance is absolutely going to impact the way that you operate it. So that's just one example, but they're absolutely tied, and you have to understand the challenges and work together to make that optimal. I think you got to have, to be world class, I think you have to have a disciplined framework. You can't just, there's got to be a roadmap. There's got to be some, understanding of, how do you break it down? What are the elements of asset management? How do you define each of those, and how do you work towards each of those? And that you will go out there and internally and externally benchmark or evaluate that framework, and how are you meeting it versus maybe what others in your industry class or maybe other industry classes are doing. I think a really good example of that, or a place to start, is with Terrence O'Hanlon and Uptime Element Framework. I see it as a very effective framework. It does a really good job outlining some of the key elements to that. I'm sure there are others out there. They've done a great job, I think, defining the key elements of that framework and how to work towards that. As you have a framework, I think an organization that creates and continually improves is, if you have that mindset and you build that culture and you reward people by that across the entire organization, then I think you're going to get the right behaviors in the organization. And the only way that's going to happen is being driven by leadership. There's that connection between leadership, behaviors, and what actions people take and what that culture then becomes. But those are all very, very important. But the underline is, you can't say, hey, if you say you're world class, and in a way you're not world class, because it's something that it's very hard to ever say you're at the finish line. You've always got to continuously improve. To do that, I think you have to understand risk, and it's not to be risk adverse. You actually have to be a risk expert. You got to learn how to take the right risks and how to manage risks, how to prioritize to do that, and deploying your resources, prioritizing those resources, your investments. How do you design your equipment, your processes that you have, how you install it, how you maintain it. What is the people that have to do the work, both operations and maintenance in that strategy. But you have to do that around understanding what are the risks that you have in your operation and for the different assets. Not everything's created equal, and you can't attack everything at once. But having a methodical way of understanding that and then making good decisions on those risks is critical. I see a lot of people saying, hey, we got to move completely to preventive maintenance or predictive maintenance or proactive, and people probably get in fistfights saying, hey, what's the right one? And I think it's a never-ending battle. But the answer is yes. You actually have to have a combination of breakdown maintenance, preventative, predictive or condition monitoring, and proactive maintenance to be world class, which means you understand how to apply each of those strategies in your overarching strategy to get your optimal, hey, how do you get the most production on quality for the lowest cost, and do that on a consistent basis, and make people happy doing it. That's but it comes to balancing that, and that balance has to come from the risk. I think another important thing is being committed to using root cause analysis and not to be afraid to look in the mirror for systemic issues or opportunities. I think if people will embrace, people embrace root cause analysis to really get to the underlying reasons, you'll be successful. And I think if you get a culture of that, great. I've walked in to offices where everyone knew the answer to why a piece of equipment failed, and they hadn't even looked at I call it the dead body. No one even looked at the dead body yet, but they knew the answer. I'm like, wait a minute, you don't even looked at the evidence, or you haven't talked to anyone, or, you got to break those paradigms and really be committed to dig in and understand, you got to handle the truth. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but if you get an organization that will embrace that, I think they'll be successul. I think you got to have processes. I think you've got to make sure that they're fit for purpose, to have the right processes in place. You have to be flexible to change them as you understand them. But just doing stuff off the back of your hand or being told by someone who you replaced and then on, not a good way. I think having robust processes of doing things sets standards and helps people do jobs the right way, which kind of then fits into kind of fit for purpose precision maintenance or asset management. When you look at design, alignment, balance, looking at putting in foundations, doing belt tension, those kind of things, those are really important, and doing the right precision, but it's got to be based on risk. You're not going to do precision, you're not going to do the same alignment standards for something running 300 RPM as you are for something running 7,200 RPM. And especially if one is not producing a lot and has a spare, and the other one's critical to operation. So you have to figure out when to apply each of those, but having those precision techniques in place are critical. I always like this, work the plan, plan the work the plan, but be flexible. But do what you say you're going to do. If you start deviating from that, from a leadership perspective, I think people start, doubting your commitment to doing that. I think what's really important too is investment in innovation and being willing to make mistakes. But you always have to be looking at what other people are doing, what best practices are out there. They're not all going to work. You certainly don't want to punish people for coming up with ideas. And people have sometimes ways of doing that, like a idea box, whatever like that. But I think it's more than that. I think it's really people waking up in the morning saying, hey, how can I make the jobs better? How can I re-engineer this? How do I make it better? And reward people for making mistakes as well as for getting it right. But have a really learning atmosphere in place. Again, I keep on talking about people rewards and behaviors and stuff. So it really means to be successful, people are your greatest asset, and you got to make sure people have the right tools, process, that you design things on how they do their work properly, that they're trained well, and that they have the right rewards, and no matter what job you have in a facility, that at the end of the day, you feel like you're worthwhile, and you're getting rewarded, and different people are rewarded in different ways, or they see it in different ways. But understanding the people side of it is critical, and making sure that everything's in place to make it a rewarding experience for people is absolutely paramount. I always like to do things based on a practical, not just a theoretical. I mean, a lot of people will write books and give you a binder of, a meter wide, saying here, or thick, here's all the things you need to do. But make sure, things are practical, that there are practical solutions out there, and that people aren't sitting from a desk just coming up with nice ideas, but, working with people that know, the people that actually do the work and designing things to make them practical. I guess the last thing I'd say is, we talk about people again and leadership, and it's about having the right team members in place, from the mechanics to electricians, to the supervisors, to planners, to the management. You got to have the right people in place and operations that all believe in the things I just covered, and that everyone's going in the same direction, and that it can withstand people changes, and because people will change. And a lot of times, if you've got one champion and all of a sudden that person changes and the whole thing falls apart, then you're not going to be world class. What gives me personal satisfaction is when I can go back to a facility that I worked at 20 years ago, and they're still doing some of the same processes, that I could see my footprint. It wasn't just because of me, it was everyone doing it together. But when you see what you worked on together still in place, now you feel that to me is rewarding, and it says, hey, I think you've moved the needle in the right direction. So get all that done, I think you're world class.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think obviously there's so much in that answer, but I think probably my takeaway, if anything, was placing not necessarily, maybe it's equal importance on what people might term like the soft skills part of the job. I think as engineers, sometimes we get buried so much in the technicalities of writing the correct procedure and doing the risk matrix and getting the like you said, the precision maintenance absolutely dead on. And what sometimes can fall by the wayside is the people, the culture that kind of enables that. So for me, that that I think is not that either is more important, but to put more of an emphasis on that, quote unquote, soft skill part of asset management. And like you said, starting with leadership and ensuring that there is a whole culture around making sure that everyone's aligned in the right direction. And part of that, which I thought was a really interesting part of your answer, was that idea of treating not only external parties but also internal parties as if they're your customer, which, you know, people, I think they hear that and they very much think of like a sales type role, like a sales focus. You're always told to put the customer's needs first. But I think that's a great way of, you know, empathizing with people, basically anyone who's affected by your work, right? If you think of them as being a customer, what would they want out of my job? That's a really great way of kind of framing that way of thinking. I really like that. So now that we've got that sort of North Star, right? Like that's our ideal picture of what one looks like. What's the reality on the ground that you see? Like in your experience, you know, you've been to plenty of sites. How close or how far are a lot of businesses from that sort of idealized picture of world-class maintenance, and maybe even does it divide up by, you know, different sectors or maybe different countries, you know, realizing that there's not a correct answer here, but, you know, often different sectors, for example, have different skill levels or they're funded in a different way, and that can affect, you know, their outlook as well. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I also think you have to answer that question over a time span.
Yeah,
You
true.
know, one company that was great doesn't mean they're always great.
Right.
You know, but now you know, I've had the opportunity to go all over the world. I've been to, I don't want to say thousands, but hundreds of different, you know, different industries, all, you name it. If it moved, I think I've seen it, which is great. And I've just been in lots of different countries and companies. You know, and I've seen a wide spectrum of performance, you know, and just about every industry in each country, you see a spectrum out there. And it's, you know, I think that spectrum will always be out there because people are at different parts of their life cycle. And just because, like I said before, just because you're great at one part of your life cycle, it as again, people change and, you know, finances change and companies change. It's a never ending battle. But I do typically see in certain industries, such as pharmaceuticals, petrochemical, aviation, nuclear, you know, the ones that really have an impact on society, you know, from safety, environmental, or financial, have high risk. Yeah, those you see have a pretty good lifespan on an ongoing basis of world class, that they really are investing to be the best that they can when they're in hyper competitive, you know, industries. But they also have a commitment because they won't be in business very long if they have a mistake. So those type of companies I see are setting the pace, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what they do is necessarily the best for every company. It's got to be fit for purpose and the risk that you're managing. But they, you know, those are some really good ones. I would have said, you know, at one time, some countries definitely outperform others. But I think because of technology, you know, how close we've all become around the world. The fact that you're in Australia, I'm in the U.S. right now, we're talking not like this. You know, 20 years ago, this wouldn't even think of it, and we're able to share and learn. I've seen many places catch up and been very impressed with whether that's in Latin America, Europe, Asia, you know, in the you know, in the Americas. It's, you know, just it's great to see that it's really, the bar has been risen. I do see a lot of opportunity more for the small medium enterprises out there, and it's not because they don't have smart people, and some of them do have great asset management programs, but just because of resources and kind of sophistication. I think that there are a lot of that they have probably more quick gains to you know, at hand, that they could take advantage, you know, as long as it's fit for their purpose, that they could take advantage of. And it's just connecting them to the right expertise. And, you know, I think once they get the commitment from a leadership and behavior, just taking a few techniques and tools, it doesn't have to be, you know, this huge, you know, beast of some of these larger companies, but they can make some really quick, you know, quick gains. I guess the final one, I think I kind of started off with this, is I think one successful to world class is never saying that you are world class. you got to recognize progress, but I think it's a dangerous game to declare absolute victory in this. If you are, I don't think you'll be there very long. You're going to get knocked off the hill.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think basically what you've outlined there, that tracks broadly with what I see. I think that the comment about the small to medium enterprises having both maybe like the potential for very, very quick gains, but also the capacity as well. So like just my experience working with a few clients, that sort of medium-sized enterprise is almost like the sweet spot where they have enough resourcing that they can put things together pretty quickly, but they also don't have the burden of so much red tape and processes and different risk assessments that they got to do. The really, really large companies, sometimes they're so slow to change, that medium-sized enterprise seems to be able to have the resourcing, but also be nimble enough to be able to do it. And then, like you said, once you get into sort of like that small business and small scale manufacturing, it's really hard for them, when you've only got so many resources to throw at a problem. And I think that sort of ties a little bit back to what you discussed in sort of my first question, which was, you've got to have the capacity for people to be replaced. That can be hard when you only have a maintenance and asset management team of like 3 people, right?
Right.
Everyone becomes essential to the enterprise. So that is obviously just a risk of being a small business. But yeah, now maybe one thing I think would be interesting to discuss is what are some of the larger barriers that you see? So we've already talked about what is world-class asset management. And then we've talked a little bit about the current state of most of those sectors. So if we want to get from where we are to the idealized state, what do you see as some of those biggest barriers to improvement? Right. So, just to throw some ideas, like is it lack of knowledge and lack of training? Is it that we don't have the right KPIs set up? Is it because we find it difficult to measure against those KPIs? Like, what do you see as being some of those problems?
Yeah, I'm going to joke a little bit to start out with. If it weren't for all the people, that everything would work great.
Yeah.
I joke there because I think working with people is the best part of it all. That's what makes coming to work fun.
Yeah, we used to also
And
say that when I was in the sales function as well. If only we didn't have customers, selling would be easy.
yeah, right. Yeah. But I mean, the biggest challenge is the human factor, and that it'd be great if everything just works from a manual, great. But there are people out there, and people make mistakes, and people have egos, people have their own desires and goals, and so it isn't that the human element is it's the biggest barrier, but it's also the greatest opportunity and the most rewarding. And I think the number one area out of that is, barrier is lack of leadership or commitment to excellence. It just takes one oopsie, one mistake, saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, not leading correctly, and it shoots everything down the drain. It just people lose. They lose their faith. Everyone's got to have that. It's people really have to walk the talk, and they have to really believe in what they say and do. They have to be committed to it. That you can't wake up one morning and say, "Hey, no, we're going back the old way." Whether that's just reliability or safety or any of these, it's absolutely critical. There is due to lack of knowledge, but again, that's more related to if you have the right leadership in place in the framework, the rest will come. But it is critical because as people change, that lack of knowledge becomes even greater, and that culture becomes even greater. So it's the other part of leadership and culture is just getting everyone aligned. You imagine, we both worked for ExxonMobil. That's a very large organization. Just getting everyone aligned to say yes, this is what success looks like and how we want it becomes very challenging. But even in a smaller organization, it can still be very challenging. And you got to get operations, maintenance. You got to get the engineering to design it correctly in the first place. or that they just put in a piece of equipment, but they didn't design how to get the piece of equipment out there if you have to repair it. They didn't put anything for a crane overhead or anything like that. So everyone's got to have empathy for each other. They have to understand it, and they have to be aligned as an organization. And you do have to measure, you do have to have good KPIs, both success and failures. It's critical to drive the right behaviors, to learn where to invest, to help people learn themselves. But the KPIs themselves, I'd like to keep as few as possible, as simple as possible, that really drive the right behavior. But just having the KPIs by themselves doesn't win the battles or the war. But it's alignment and commitment to what they're trying to achieve, what those metrics are trying to achieve, and how to achieve them is more critical. Then the KPIs, it all connects to each other, to make it all make sense and drive those right behaviors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think one of the overarching themes that I'm sensing is, a lot of it does come back to that leadership and direction. Not that everything is top down, but it's more about sort of establishing that culture to make sure that everyone's, like you said, aligned in the right direction. I think that's a really good takeaway from this. Maybe to pivot just a little bit. One of the things that we talked about initially with what does world-class maintenance look like is this idea that we always want to be tying it to maybe we want to call it like a license to operate almost, your environmental concerns and obviously productivity comes out of that as well. But the one sort of like the big elephant in the room is safety, right? Safety performance as well. So is there any way to, let's say, draw a direct link between our world-class asset management or our world-class maintenance and the safety performance in the field?
I'm going to be biased. In my life, whether when I was working in a paper mill or when I worked for ExxonMobil for the years, just about in every job I had, I was a safety champion. I, worked myself or created it or had the opportunity given to me to not be in the safety department, but to be the champion for the organization, around keeping people safe. And, there's a massive connection between world-class asset management and safety. By the way, we could have our own podcast probably just on that by itself, but I'll try not to pontificate. Yeah, but I have a great passion about it. I love the subject. I love, because it is about people, and it is about engineering. But I think start off with is just as we talked about before, leadership and commitment. Well, there's got to be commitment with safety, just as there are around asset management. And that's, nobody gets hurt. Having a standard where it's not, just the, number of hours without a safety incident or whatever. I mean, bottom line, it's got to be as clear cut is no one's going to come to this job and get hurt. That's the yard mark. I do know is the connection, an old friend of mine, he worked at ExxonMobil, and I think he heard this from someone else, but he said, told me, and it stuck with me forever. He goes, if you have a safe operation, I can't guarantee you're going to have a successful business. But what I can guarantee you will fail if you don't have a safe operation. Right? So just because you're safe doesn't mean you're going to make lots of money. But I can guarantee you, if you're not safe, you'll never make money, and you won't be world class in asset management. So that always stuck there to me. So it just shows how foundational it is to your asset management program. The tie, it's between the two. They're absolutely tied, because when you design and install to the strategies that you're deploying to maintain them, you're setting yourself up for success or failure. If you make things hard to, if you have to crawl around equipment to inspect it, or if you have to replace something on a piece of equipment, you're putting yourself in harm's way. If you don't have the right guarding in place, if you don't even have the right behavior driving things in place, safety becomes pretty tough. It's critical not just to meet the regulations, but have a focus on eliminating loss, about that nobody getting hurt. And you have to, we need our engineers, and again, that could be a mechanic, that can be an electrician, that can be a maintenance engineer, it could be a reliability engineer. Engineer means whoever's out there figuring out how to do work. You got to have the right design, the right installation, processes, tools, and how you're going to repair it. And that's going to be along the whole PF, curve, the whole life cycle. I've seen recently, I like how they've expanded the PF curve from, hey, it's not just when you detect a problem to when it fails, but it's way upstream of that. It's the original designs and having that all in place to make sure you're maximizing it. And you have to be committed, around the human performance factor. That's something within ExxonMobil we really dove into in the last few years, which is really, when you start looking at behavior and behavioral tools, it's around designing things, realizing that you have humans, not robots, at work, and that people will make mistakes at all levels of the organization, and that you have to understand that human performance factor when you design and maintain things to set people up for success. So understanding that human factors is critical. I see the other thing, just like we were talking about rewarding people for the job they're doing, you have to reward safe behavior. You have to make sure you have the right metrics and evaluations in place. They've got to include safety, and you really should. You shouldn't, this is my personal thing, you shouldn't be rewarding people for not getting hurt. You should be rewarding for the behaviors that allows them not to get hurt. So just relying on a number, hey, no one got hurt. Okay, people do a lot of strange things to get that reward. You really want to focus, if you do the focus on the behaviors and the actions people and reward that, you'll find that you'll get to the other end of the equation. And I think it's important when you're measuring it. It's a really good thing to measure is how are you minimizing the human machine interface and hours of risk. I think that's critical. I think as people are doing their work and understanding, hey, if I do this a different way, use a different process, different tools, different lubricant, hey, I can reduce the amount of time a human and a machine have to interface with each other. If I can reduce that, then I'm mitigating the risks down to an acceptable or more acceptable level to stay safe. Obviously, if you're in and I would there, I've been 24-hour day in a paper mill, which to me is not safe. If you're sitting there for 24 hours on a breakdown trying to get a machine back going, versus having a well planned out, you minimize the time you have with that machine, everything's planned out. So many things get avoided. So really understanding that and managing those risks are critical. I hope that makes sense. I did share some graphs. I think you're going to pull them up, but I could just talk through some of the graphs just briefly. I think they're important. It's from a person I met, a lot of respect for, a guy named Ron Moore, and he had some great correlations. He's from the RM group, and he was good with allowing me to use some of these. In fact, I think some of these graphs may have been ExxonMobil as a case history, but they don't have the name on there. But it shows a correlation between the way you run your equipment and injury rate. And the first graph is showing you the injury rate as a percentage of a base on the y-axis on the left side, and then on the right side you've got your overall equipment effectiveness or asset utilization, again as a percentage of base over time. And you can see the regression calculation is 0.64, which is not a home run, but it's pretty good. I mean, that's to me, when you get over 0.5, you're pretty good correlation. But you can look at the graphs themselves. You can look at the lines. The yellow line is that injury rate, and the bluish line, or what light blue line, is the OEE line. And you can see as one's, as the OEE's up, the injury rate's down, and vice versa. So a pretty good correlation there. Another graph, below that one shows just if you look at the type of work orders that are being done and number of injuries in the facility based on the number of those work orders. You see, the more corrective or reactive work orders you do in a year, the higher the injury rate. Pretty good correlation but between those for that facility. And the last one is now looking at really the opposite, which is you're doing more PM work, you're doing more condition-based monitoring. You can see the injury rate going down. There's a great correlation. If you look at the regression, 0.9 is pretty darn good. You could argue, hey, is this extensive enough of an investigation, et cetera? But pretty good correlation between the two.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen it sort of expressed in that way. You know, we always hear about the link, that it makes sense that, you know, if you have to interact with equipment less, then it stands to reason that there are fewer opportunities to be injured. I don't think I've ever actually seen the data presented in that way so clearly. So yeah, that's a really interesting data point that directly, if you like, links all the different activities that we're doing on site with site safety. For me, that's a really important takeaway from this discussion, because I don't think I've ever seen it that clearly.
To me, it tells you the more you do based on condition monitoring and plan basis, your injury rate's going to be going down. Or you know, you're going to be better. You know, you're going to have higher injury rates if everything's breakdown. You know, so
yeah,
it does correlate really well.
Yeah, and it makes total sense too, right? Like if you have unplanned work, and like you said, if you're doing reactive work, you had less opportunity to plan it out. You're in a bigger rush, trying to get the plant, you know, up and running because you're losing productivity. You're on the clock. It makes sense that you're going to make more mistakes, and people are going to get hurt. So I think that's you know, that tracks with how you could logic it out, but also it makes a lot of it makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
So maybe if we can talk about, you know, we've talked a little bit about where people are, where people would like to get to. Now we've kind of established that there's a desire to get there, not only because it's going to improve your plant productivity, but also the safety of your workers as well. So if we can maybe get into some just general practical tips for, you know, what do you see as being very, very common low-hanging fruit on a lot of the sites that you go to, and how would you go about addressing some of those?
Yeah, the temptation is always to go at technology, you know, or some sort of new tool or some approach, which I'm going to list some, you know, but you got to take a step before that. You got to start, I think, you know, to get to the low hanging fruit. If you just start, if you implement some of the things I'm going to tell you, you're going to get some wins, you get some low hanging fruit, but what you want to sustain it, you want to build on it, you want to get better and better and get fit for purpose to be world class. So to really do it right, the best step is first making sure you're setting up an asset management framework. Use that as a start. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but you got something to start. What is your roadmap? What are the elements of your program? Who needs to be involved? And start evaluating your enterprise against that. And that does get back to call it the softer side, but that means you got to start assessing, well, what do the operations people think of maintenance? What do the maintenance people think of operation? What is engineering? Does anyone think of them at all? Or, you know, what are people's beliefs and behaviors across the organization? You know, not just top down, but, you know, from everyone has got to be included into that evaluation.
I just want to jump in there as well, because, you know, specifically just to talk about lubrication. I mean, that, like you said, the opinion of what is it that the lube techs do, and what value do they add to the organization, that to me is like the biggest misnomer that I see in a lot of sites is, oh, you know, either all lubes are the same, right? Or they're all interchangeable, or only the viscosity grade matters, or, you know, or this is not these are not precision engineered products. I don't have to treat it like a bearing or anything like that. I can, you know, pour whatever in. And like you said, it's that mindset, right, of the understanding of what is people's opinion of that practice. So yeah, I just wanted to jump in there because obviously for lubricants, it's so important.
Absolutely. When I worked at a paper mill, the lube technicians were the lowest paid folks in the organization, or one of the lowest, and they were not looked at, and the job of lubrication wasn't seen as very tough, and When people opened their eyes and started really, and you start putting process and how important it is, and the fact that these folks are your eyes and ears of the facility, and you start rewarding them, and people understand that, then you elevate that position, and you get, I think, you get people really satisfied with the work that they're doing, and you get folks to understand how important the lifeblood, literally the lifeblood of machinery is. So I absolutely agree with you. But other low hanging, talking about low hanging fruit, I guess go back to this. I would be careful, just again, not throwing a bunch of technology or activity without some sort of framework. It's important to have alignment from top management as well as key influencers, and those key influencers are the people on the ground floor, the people doing the work. You have to do across there to get alignment that, hey, we're not going to conquer the world at once, but we got to tell people, hey, this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's better for them, what's in it for them, and start building success to get people behind the work. I would start, I mean, this is going to sound like common sense, or like, I can't, doesn't take much thought, but start working on the highest impact area that requires the least amount of work. Start getting some sort of Pareto chart out there, and start saying, hey, what are the things? And there are so many solutions out there that really don't take a lot of money or effort. And you're like, I was embarrassed actually in some of the techniques, and I'll mention some down there, simplest techniques that brought so much dividend back. And it was so easy. It was like, oh, I slapped myself on the forehead. I can't believe we hadn't been doing that kind of thing all along. It was so simple to do, and it had such a high impact. So, but it is, hey, start figuring out what are the things that are really costing you money, or time, or what's preventing you from reaching your production the most, and start hitting those right off the bat. But it's important to tie that back again. I'm going to sound like a broken record. Tie it back to the framework. Even if these simple ones, you got to get people, take them back and say, hey, this is where this fits in this roadmap. That's why we're working on this one, and make sure that you're bringing them along so that folks understand that, because there's going to be resistance. Because guess what happens when you start breaking down? Your overtime starts going down. Other things start going down. So some people are going, hey, how's that good for me? Well, in some cases, we redeployed those overtime hours on more proactive things versus reactive. So you're actually able to redeploy. Some could be, hey, there is some cost, but the company is going to be in business for a while. That's, and they also could see raises in their wages. So you have to manage those things. I do think, I'm a ex-wrestler, football player. So I think you got to have the foundation in place. Any good player have to have the basic things in place. So I think you have to have a strong computerized maintenance management system, CMMS, in place, that has good, strong preventive maintenance capability. You do have to pick a good predictive maintenance or condition monitoring software and tools that are simple to start out with, but that you can expand and innovate against them. But start simple and then innovate, and reward people for that innovation. The culture also has to be that, this is the way. I'm from Star Wars, The Mandalorian, this is the way. People have to understand, they have to be rewarded, and this does have to come top down, that this is the way we're going to work, and this is how we're going to get rewarded at work. And not all of those are all low hanging fruit. Trust me, that all those tools and stuff, those are not all low hanging, but they're critical foundation that has to be in place. The ones I do say very low hanging fruit, and people may say that they're not that low hanging, but just establishing operation controls on critical or high incident equipment. I can't believe how many times people didn't understand what their oil pressure was, or what's the flow rate, or, what's the pump curve, where's this pump sitting on its curve, performance curve, what's the filter differential at, and no one knows. And you're like, oh my God, you're flying blind. Now some modern equipment, it's all programmed in, and it's, built in, and you can see it and alarm off of it. But people, even if you have it automated, you still have to have a commitment to understanding it. And if you don't, you're flying blind. And you can find so many things when you start looking at those things that, hey, something's not right, especially in lubricate the world of lubrication. So many times I found, oh my God, the flow rate is 1/4 of what it should have been, and someone accidentally turned a knob. So having that commitment to that day in, day out is important. I think establishing lube walkarounds, PM routes, and that doesn't just mean the people, the mechanics or electricians. That also means the supervisors and managers got to walk around too. And you've got to walk that facility. You got to understand what's going on. This is the time that you can get alignment with people out there, get buy-in. And what you're doing is you got to get people out there. If you're just running from meeting to meeting, and you're not spending time out on the floor and building relationships and seeing how things are going, you got to be, people will react to that. They'll be responsive to it. And especially if you start rewarding people as you're doing it. I think starting a simple FMEA, failure mode effect analysis on the most critical equipment I think is low hanging fruit. Sometimes people get overwhelmed by them, but if you keep them simple, and you just focus on the most critical where you get the most problems, just start there and start designing around that your framework. I think there's a lot of gold for not that much work. And then combine that with root cause analysis, meaning after something's failed, go look at the dead body, go pull it out, talk to people, understand the processes involved, what was the timeline, who was involved, so you can really start understanding. You don't do that on everything, but start small and start, especially with the critical ones that's going to be there. I love walking to facilities that have a table outside their condition monitoring, and they've got all the dead bodies. Sometimes it's their trophy case, which is great. Want to show people, and you show here's what we found. You got to show them that so that they believe in what you're telling them, from vibration, thermography, oil analysis, whatever. But also that they're taking the time to say, well, why did this fail? And not just the direct cause, but starting to dig down. Well, how was that installed? Or how is this being run? Or, how is the filtration on this working? Those kind of things. I think really, really low work effort, but you got to start somewhere, and you got to be committed to doing that day in, day out, which really kind of gets into setting standards, simple work processes, and how work's done. If you just leave it as institutional knowledge, if you have really good people, you'll probably run pretty well. But people change, and you're going to have lots of you're going to have lots of deviation of work performance. The more you can get the people that have those best practices and get those into standard processes to make sure people understand how our job's supposed to be done, fit for purpose, I think you'll be successful on a longer period of time. The next one is one of the embarrassing ones. We got an idea. Hey, let's put just we were going to put everything online with temperature on electric motors, and we said, man, why don't we just do an infrared gun? We could tie it into our CSI 2120 back at the time, and we got our lubricators to do it. We just sprayed black paint, so we shot the same place each time, and you had the right emissivity each time. And it was amazing that what we found just by shooting the temperature once a week, and it just logged it. We put some simple limits. I mean, we found cooling fans missing. We found pumps running off their performance curve. You found ventilation plugged up. Just all sorts of things. The orifice on our vacuum pump got destroyed, and so it was pulling way too, vacuum pump working way too hard. But just so it almost cost us nothing, because we were already walking around the equipment anyway. So easy to do. I think using ultrasonics for air leaks and steam traps really good. On the lubrication side, using ultrasonics for like relubrication, I think is not necessarily low hanging fruit. It's good practice from a survey to evaluate your regreasing frequencies, but just for air leaks and steam, so much money to be had just finding where those are. I think tracking lube consumption, just simple, where you use an oil and why is very, very important. And then start aligning and balancing your equipment, as well as finding the ones that have bad foundations. I think really, really low hanging fruit to get going. Don't train 20 people to do it. Pick a couple people and focus. And then remember I said this is the way. On those critical equipment, you don't start it up until someone signed off that they've met those standards. And then if they can't, in operations or everyone makes a decision, you got the right sign off that people took that risk and then are committed to go back the next outage to correct that. You get to that kind of mindset. Now people understand how important that precision is, but don't start on everything. But start picking on that critical equipment first.
Yeah,
So anyway, it's a long
that's awesome.
of stuff off my head. I'm sure there are many others people have experience with, but those are some ones I found, low hanging.
Yeah, the infrared gun one I think is awesome. Like as far as the equipment checks go, just because, like you said, it's so simple and it's so quick to do, and there is obviously a move to more like comprehensive infrared thermography where we're getting really complicated and really finessing it. But even just the basics of taking a single temperature reading as you go around the plant. I mean, and like you said, if you can trend it over time, then you can pick up an awful lot of failures. But again,
one more I got to talk about is coupling and universal joint inspections. I mean, they're not necessarily easy, to do, but just doing. I mean, amazing the stuff you uncover. Not necessarily just with the coupling, but just with things like play, loose things. I just so much stuff, seals being missing on a coupling, grease coupling, or even an elastomer where the guards rubbing the elastomer. Just simple stuff that simple visual, a commitment to doing that, huge payoff.
Yeah, definitely. So as we sort of like wrap up here, maybe the question that would be interesting to know the answer to is: have you seen any examples of businesses that have made that leap from, some relatively not necessarily a low baseline, but wherever they were, and have made sort of that step up to world class, asset management? And I guess what did it take? What did it take? Obviously, you've outlined some ways, and a lot of it's driven, like you said, by leadership. And what follows from that is culture, and then what follows from that is behaviors, and what follows from that is sort of like the technical set of skills. But is there a particular example that you can think of where that was sort of achieved in a really good way?
Yeah, a lot of people, if they hear, "Hey, I'm ExxonMobil," they think, "Oh, ExxonMobil." ExxonMobil and to me, is one of the premier asset management companies out there. But they're very mature, and it's a critical industry. But one I would say where I really saw an opportunity where we moved from non-world class to a different state was when I worked in a paper mill. I worked in Kingsport, Tennessee. It was a Willamette mill. Now it's a Domtar. In fact, because of economic, it did shut down just recently. Now it's starting back up. It's starting back up because they do have a world-class organization. They're great people. But when I was there, this is a little few years ago, but I had the opportunity to be part of a great team. And I'm not, would I say we're world class and absolute? Probably not. But if I look at the amount of positive change and the massive amount of downtime reduction and costs we had, and the culture that we really built was amazing. I mean, it wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But I remember showing up at this mill, and the guy that brought me on, he's now passed away, great guy, Roy Davidson, and he brought me up there. "You're in charge of the reliability program." And I told my wife, I said, "I think I made a big mistake." I mean, first week out there, everything had failed. I mean, I was doing all-nighters. I'm like, "Oh my God, what have I got myself into?" But we started building that framework of what we're going to do, and started doing that piece by piece, got the people in place. And we went down from almost, they were going to sell that plant or shut it down, to being the flagship of the company back then. And people started really looking at that. And again, not just from the maintenance, but from operations as well. And there were still many opportunities to do there, but just so world class, as someone could say now, I know you weren't world, but man, it was just great to see the change in culture and commitment, and go from really be on the ropes to being out of business to really being a good flagship. But it did start with strong leadership and commitment from the top, but also include listening to folks on the front lines and rewarding people for the right behaviors. And it did start with some very basic but low hanging fruit. Some of the things that we talked up above, putting in a vibration program, just regular thermography, oil analysis, doing things more planned inspections. And we learned along the way and got more and more sophisticated. But it was that to me was a really good one. And I was just going to also add on this question that you just had is, I do see people can learn a lot from different companies. There are lots of other industries, that have, very sophisticated where they've adopted the, IoT, they've gone digital, that, wow, amazing things that they're doing, to the basics, people doing some basic things really, really well. And I do encourage people to subscribe to reliability magazines. I love you on your LinkedIn sharing some really good materials. I do encourage people to go to reliabilityweb.com and go to the University of Tennessee. I know I'm a U.S. guy. I'm talking about a U.S. University, but Marcon, great website. Go, where you can really learn what some other folks are doing. But I think you can continue to learn from that. But that's what I saw as, kind of being a part and seeing it. Being right in the middle of the battle and going through, oh my God, what have I got myself into, to some frustrations, but then stepping back and you see even today, as they're starting the plant back up, they're using some of the same things that we had in place, from the process perspective and what the framework, et cetera. So really nice to see.
Yeah, that's awesome, and sort of a great place to end it. And I think sort of it speaks to one of our original questions, which was the way that all the countries have started to sort of even themselves out because of the availability of all these like digital resources, right? That realistically now it doesn't really matter where you are in the world, you've got access to the same knowledge base and the same information that everyone does. So great opportunity. Also means there's no excuse, right?
Now, if you want to stay in if you want to stay in business,
yeah, exactly. Hey, Thom, really appreciate the discussion, your insight, coming from, obviously a wealth of experience, in multiple industries as well, being able to see kind of across the board, multiple industries, many countries, many, let's say, different levels of asset management as well. So it was really good to get your take on, especially some of those, what are the sort of key, enablers, I guess, of a world-class asset management program, but also, what are some of the practical steps that we can take to improve our own program. So really appreciate your time, and I'll definitely have to get you back on. I know you sort of hinted that there's probably another podcast in you about safety. So we'll definitely have to get you back.
No, awesome, Rick. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great. Love discussing it. I hope it helps